What's on the mind of a man whose only way to feel alive is to kill? Who is capable of showing the greatest emotional coldness, but at the same time a strong sense of morality, a strict value system, and deep feelings of loneliness, guilt, and emptiness? Today we're going to analyze Dexter Morgan. My name is Dexter Morgan. A killer who only targets others who, like him, take lives. A child with a deep trauma searching for an emotional connection and who, nevertheless, was taught to channel that energy into a supposedly moral kind of crime. An extremely complex psychological profile whose story I assure you will fascinate you even if you haven't seen the series. And as always, I summarize the story for you so you can learn psychology. If you don't know me, I'm Claudia Nicolasa Psicología, psychologist and author of Es Manipulación y No Lo Sé. And if you like psychological analyses and understanding the darkest and most twisted minds, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Let's get started with the video. Dexter's story goes back to one of the greatest traumas a human being can experience. His mother was working with the police to expose some drug traffickers and they found out. The punishment was brutal. They kidnapped her along with her 2 sons, and in a shipping container at the port, they dismembered her with a chainsaw. Dexter and his brother witnessed all of this, and they were also left for days abandoned in that blood-filled container next to their mother's mutilated body. Dexter was very young. I think he was about 2 years old. As an adult, he doesn't remember this event. You still have no memories from before we adopted you. He doesn't remember who he is, or at least not consciously, because his unconscious mind is completely anchored to that scene. That last moment he shared with his mother, his source of affection.
I don't know what shaped me, but it left a deep emptiness inside.
A link is then etched into Dexter's mind. Blood becomes linked to love. And so, even if Dexter forgot that event that marked his whole life and his entire psyche, he would spend his whole life chasing love, affection, and the feeling of fulfillment by seeking blood. And there's something in blood that moves Dexter, something very special. Not only does he become a forensic specialist in analyzing bloodstains at crime scenes, but ever since he was very young, he showed a fascination with blood, with death. And his adoptive father, Harry, made very strict decisions about this. But who is Harry? He's the one who found little Dexter in that grotesque scene. A Miami police officer who was already married and had a little daughter who, upon seeing Dexter in such a vulnerable situation, rescued him and adopted him. Maybe out of empathy, maybe out of guilt, maybe both. Because Dexter's mother was his informant, and they were having an affair. So, in a way, that horrible crime was his responsibility. However, it seems he didn't have the same compassion for Dexter's older brother. Maybe, since he was older, Harry thought he would be more aware of what he had experienced, more traumatized, and ultimately, more problematic. Whereas Dexter, being a baby, probably wouldn't remember anything and would be an easy adoption. He was not only wrong, because these memories are fixed in our minds even if we are not aware of them, and they affect the way we are, perceive, and act. But also, without knowing it, he sealed the fate of someone who would become one of the main serial killers in the seasons of Dexter, the so-called Ice Killer. Brian was sent to a psychiatric center, and his trauma gradually turned into an antisocial personality disorder that would lead him to act without any remorse or guilt. We'll talk about Dexter's brother later. Although Dexter, as a child, didn't remember this event and didn't show any apparent signs of trauma, his father soon began to notice some warning signs. That fascination with blood, death, knives, killing small animals. He didn't cry, didn't show sadness or fear. He seemed empty, without emotions. He was solitary, reserved. He didn't seek to interact with other children, and he showed a certain obsession with order, control, and cleanliness. Yes, many of these signs are indications of psychopathy. In children, Harry, as a good police officer, was probably trained in how to detect these kinds of profiles. But before taking childhood psychopathy as the final diagnosis, other possible psychological reasons behind these behaviors must be ruled out. Let's remember that in psychology, behaviors and symptoms matter when it comes to making a diagnosis. But even more important is what the origin is and what the function of that behavior is, and what was really behind this behavior in little Dexter. First of all, the fascination with blood, death, and knives was not an innate morbid curiosity, but rather a form of trauma reenactment. This boy witnessed his mother being dismembered and was trapped for hours in his mother's blood. The mind, unable to process something so overwhelming, transforms the scene into a sensory fixation. The blood becomes a symbol of that lost bond. Every time Dexter sees blood, he unconsciously relives that single emotional connection his body remembers. Second, cruelty to animals.
The Phyllises said Buddy disappeared, but I found his grave with many bones, including Dexter's and others.
It's not necessarily sadism, but it could be that externalization of trauma. The child reenacts from a position of power what overwhelmed him when he felt helpless. Killing can make him feel in control in the face of that helplessness he felt back then. And as for the absence of emotions, of crying, of fear, not feeling isn't always emotional coldness, it can be emotional dissociation. The child's brain, when faced with such extreme trauma, can disconnect from fear and sadness in order to survive. That's why they don't cry, they don't get scared, they don't seem affected. Not because he doesn't have the ability to feel emotions, but because his nervous system has learned to disconnect so it doesn't collapse. On the other hand, that loneliness, that avoidance of connection, Dexter as a child is shown as reserved, detached from play. And the thing is, traumatized children tend to distrust their environment. They distrust bonding, physical and emotional contact. Therefore, the best way to avoid that is to do without it. His isolation is not psychopathy or innate antisocial behavior, but rather a self-protection mechanism. And finally, regarding that obsession with order, cleanliness, and control, well, after a trauma where chaos, blood, and filth were the main elements, it's normal for the child to develop a need to exert control over their environment, for it to be predictable. External order is a defense against that internal chaos. What might seem like an innate obsessive trait can actually be an emotional regulation strategy in response to anxiety. As you can see, in my professional opinion, what Dexter was expressing wasn't a desire to kill. It wasn't a desire to dominate, to hurt, or to have power. What he was expressing was a need for help. Help that a child who has witnessed such horror, no matter their age, should receive immediately. However, Harry saw a potential monster in these requests for help, and he made a terrible decision. Instead of a psychologist who was an expert in child psychology and trauma, Harry consulted Evelyn Vogel, a neuropsychiatrist who specialized in psychopathic brains. A professional who probably wouldn't have training, or at least not in-depth training, in child clinical work, trauma, or psychodynamics. As a result, the famous confirmation bias. If I, as a professional, only have one lens through which to see things, I'm going to interpret everything according to that lens. So, the diagnosis of childhood psychopathy was confirmed because that's what that lady knew. And this doctor designed an educational plan. A plan that, mind you, could certainly be very appropriate if we were actually dealing with a primary psychopath. A psychopathic brain that, if not properly structured, given clear limits, and well socialized, can be oriented toward doing harm. A psychopath whom we have to socialize under the premise that being integrated into society will be beneficial for him. Committing crimes and causing harm ultimately hurts you. To learn more about these dark behaviors, read my book, It's Manipulation and You Don't Know It, in which you will learn both about people who manipulate consciously and in a dark way, such as psychopaths. And about those gray manipulators, who are the majority, who manipulate without realizing it and unconsciously because of all the wounds, fears, and shortcomings they haven't worked through yet. And well, that's how they designed the code. The code is a set of moral and behavioral rules instilled to control and channel their effects. And instead of treating him like a traumatized child, Evelyn and Harry decided to educate the monster.
I must be careful and follow Harry's rules.
Teach him to kill without being discovered and to do it at least with a purpose.
And not leave a trace. I can teach you.
This code consists of 4 basic rules, and Dexter accepted it, and he followed it throughout his life strictly, almost religiously. Dexter.
Harry's rules, those of my adoptive father, are satisfied.
First rule, don't get caught.
He taught me to think like a cop, to leave no trace.
Harry, being a good cop, teaches her to cover her tracks, plan every detail, and maintain a perfect double life, creating a whole ritual of preparation and control that really reinforces this obsessive side of Dexter.
And the ritual is captivating.
According to the second rule, only kill those who deserve it.
There are people who do very bad things.
Do you mean that they deserve it?
Exactly. Dexter can only kill criminals who have murdered and haven't been caught and locked up by the police. In this way, Dexter's ability to develop a sense of guilt is nullified. Rule number 3, make sure they're guilty.
But you need to know how to spot them.
Dexter must investigate thoroughly before killing to be sure that the victim really is a murderer. Something that is made much easier by Dexter working for the police. And rule number 4, pretend to be normal.
And it's important to seem normal.
Harry keeps telling him that he has to learn to act like everyone else, fake emotions, have a social life, relationships, a job. He assures him that he will never be a normal person, that he won't have the feelings other people have, that he won't be able to have a family, have children. So he trains him to camouflage that emotional disconnection behind a friendly facade and imitated social behaviors. A dissociative mask that will make it very difficult for Dexter to get to know himself, to show himself, to know himself in front of others and connect with them. Ultimately, while I think this code would be very interesting for a primary psychopath, a born psychopath, who already shows signs of psychopathy in childhood and adolescence, in Dexter's case, it's paradoxical. And precisely what it does is worsen his problems. It reinforces his obsessive traits, his need for control, his rituals. It suppresses feelings of guilt and empathy, reinforcing that emotional coldness. It distances him even more from the possibility of connecting with his vulnerability, with his humanity. It makes it even harder for him to show himself as he truly is, to fully connect with others. It prevents him from ever feeling emotionally fulfilled.
Just like me, empty inside.
If you've watched the series, you'll notice how Dexter, even though he acts like a psychopath, constantly broods over the suffering that all of this causes him.
What did I just do? How can I kill people without feeling any remorse?
It hurts him not to be like everyone else, not to feel what others feel.
The inability to feel has its advantages.
He wishes to experience deep and real connections.
I don't feel anything for anyone, but if I could, I would feel it for Deb.
He feels anxious that he can't be himself with anyone and relate sincerely.
And when I disappoint Rita, I feel like scum.
He's afraid that other people will reject him if they find out that he's actually a monster. And he feels a lot of guilt for the problems that his way of being causes to the people close to him and who deep down he cares about. And the thing is, this code not only worsens Dexter's psychological problems, but it also turns him into a psychopath. It shapes him as if he were a psychopath. And it creates an extremely serious problem that will cause a lot of suffering for Dexter. The addiction to killing.
Darkness overwhelms and controls me.
Let's remember that for Dexter, blood and death are the only way to reconnect with that feeling of affection, of life, of fulfillment. It's the gateway to the last time he experienced that deep and unconditional love. That's why blood doesn't disgust him, it attracts him. It doesn't symbolize horror, but rather that lost love. For Dexter, killing isn't just about taking someone else's life or feeling powerful. It's about reliving a connection his mind froze to avoid breaking down. But be careful. Just because the urge to kill or take lives has such a beautiful and emotional background doesn't mean it's right. And it definitely doesn't mean it should be encouraged. What should have been done is to take him to therapy and gradually guide his mind to find that affection and that sense of fulfillment in other, more normal and healthier sources. However, Harry's code actually pushes Dexter to act on these impulses.
I'm a very neat monster.
And it reinforces that this is the only way he will feel fulfilled. Because obviously these acts generate very pleasurable sensations for Dexter. It's a very powerful reinforcement on a behavioral level. Reinforcement that, I repeat, he could have found in other things. This is like when someone develops a paraphilia and constantly finds excitement and pleasure through it. If they never train themselves to find those feelings in other sexual stimuli, then it's going to get harder and harder. They become dependent on that paraphilia. By reinforcing this source of pleasure so much in Dexter and not working on other, more normal and healthier ones, this behavior, this addiction, becomes completely entrenched in him as the years go by. And when we only have one source of pleasure in our entire life, it's normal for us to become addicted to it. That's why we can say that Dexter develops an addiction, but not really to death itself, but to the emotional state that it provokes in him. When he kills, he finally feels something. But when he doesn't do it, the anxiety, the emptiness, the insomnia, the discomfort all come back. It's the same mechanism we see in any behavioral addiction. But deep down, Dexter isn't addicted to killing, but to feeling alive. To that fleeting illusion of reconnecting with the most human emotion he lost in childhood, love. For Dexter, this addiction, this lifestyle, this hobby isn't a problem. After both his adoptive mother and Harry, his adoptive father, passed away, he continues to use the code as his life compass, and he has everything perfectly set up. He lives alone, he doesn't have a partner, he only gets along with his adoptive sister, Deborah, who is also a police officer. And it's interesting how she's completely the opposite of Dexter. A super emotional person, very intense, very human, with a lot of empathy and a strong sense of morality and guilt. Dexter works with her, and since he's a forensic analyst with the police, he's in contact with what he likes the most, blood. And he also has access to information, files and evidence so that in his free time he can pursue his pleasure. But Dexter is getting older now, he's getting into his late 30s, maybe 40. And to fit into society and seem quote-unquote normal, it's no longer enough for him to just be nice, smile, and bring donuts to the office. And people start to wonder why he never gets involved with girls. Find yourself a pretty girl. And the thing is, Dexter, with an emotionally poor, numb, suppressed world, with a limited ability to connect, to bond, to open up, and to find pleasure in anything other than killing, well, obviously he doesn't have much interest in dating, love, relationships, or starting a family. However, the code always comes before what he wants. He has completely internalized that law of the father. He has to obey it to the letter. Dexter never asks himself what values, goals, or needs are important to him. He simply uses his father's code as a guide to what is right and wrong. However, an event turns Dexter's psychopathic world upside down. He falls in love unexpectedly. In his mission to completely blend into society, he goes on dates with a girl named Rita, who came to the police station because of abuse from her husband and has 2 small children. A victim burdened with trauma, abuse, and a lot of fear of physical contact and intimate relationships. In Dexter's words, a perfect woman for him.
I think I've met the perfect woman. She's not interested in sex at all. Great for him.
Well, it gives him that social cover, but it doesn't force him to do things he's not interested in, like, for example, having sex. He moves in with her, builds a relationship with the kids, and little by little, what Dexter pretends at first starts to become real without him even realizing it. He slowly starts to experience new emotions. Fear that Rita will leave him, excitement about spending time with the kids.
I need to spend more time with you and the kids. I wonder if Rita and the kids would like to go fishing. Focus.
Sadness when something bad happens to them, anger when someone threatens their new family. It even leads to experiencing desire and sexual pleasure, which is incredibly revealing in this case. Suddenly, without looking for it or expecting it, Dexter starts to find glimpses of humanity within himself.
I confess, kissing Rita was interesting. What surprises me lately is how much I like being with her.
Emotions he doesn't know, doesn't understand, and doesn't know how to handle. And the thing is, Rita symbolizes everything Dexter always needed. That unconditional love, that acceptance, that care, she can.
It's overcoming any darkness that is within you.
I know you can. That look that is able to see and express the most beautiful things you have inside you. And the thing is, Rita never judges Dexter. And she always lets him know and reminds him that he is a very good person.
I want to be that man.
You already are.
Sometimes all it takes is for someone to see us through different eyes so that we can see ourselves differently. And whoever sees a human in a monster makes the monster wonder if maybe it's not a monster after all. Even though all of this sounds very nice, it plunges Dexter into a deep crisis. Because continuing to be who he has always been and continuing to do what he has always done starts to become incompatible with his new personal situation. It's a bit like what I told you in my video about my own life crisis. But if Dexter was already confused, what happens at this point in the story puts his entire identity in check.
I don't know who I really am.
How, through his brother Brian, the ice truck killer, he discovers that his father wasn't so perfect. Parenthesis, I can't recount and analyze absolutely everything that happens in the series because it's extremely long. So if you notice that I leave out interesting elements, it's because I didn't see them as a priority to explain Dexter's profile. For example, we see that Dexter interacts with several women and with several serial killers. But I'm only going to talk to you about the ice killer, who is Brian, Dexter's older brother. Brian, instead of being adopted like Dexter, is chronically sent to institutions and involuntary admissions.
And while you were raised by the Morgan family, I only had the memory of my family.
With an upbringing lacking any kind of love or socialization, he develops antisocial personality disorder, a secondary psychopathy. Snowy, is there nowhere else in the house for you? Yes. He devotes himself to killing innocent women, cutting off parts of their bodies the way they did to his mother, and committing many other macabre acts.
We saw Mom die. How did we survive that?
And it's very relevant in Dexter's story because it gives him clues, signals, and certain emotional and memory triggers that help Dexter remember who he is, where he comes from, what happened. And even that he has a biological brother. Brian had been watching him for a while and knew about his dark side. And what he's looking for is to recreate a nice reunion between brothers, encouraging Dexter to fully embrace his dark, murderous side, to kill together happily.
You can be yourself with me.
And to give up all that code, those rules, and that normal life he pretends to have. Brian kidnaps Dexter's adoptive sister Deborah and serves her up on a platter for Dexter to end her life. Symbolically, Brian wants Dexter to choose that dark, primal, instinctive side. In other words, to choose his brother, the killer, over his human side, which until now has been faked and adopted, but is starting to become real and is represented by his sister Deborah.
We're ready for Deborah now.
Just like Rita, she has always believed in that good side of Dexter, so we see that Dexter is facing an important dilemma here when it comes to his identity. To give up his dark self, the part he knows and controls so well, or to let down his walls, his defenses, and open himself up to the uncertainty of emotions and relationships. Something completely unknown and even threatening, as we all know it is, and he chooses the second option, killing Brian and saving Deborah. In other words, saving his human side.
I'm not the monster he wants me to be.
To me, this seems like a perfect metaphor for therapy, recognizing your dark side, saying goodbye to it, and choosing your humanity and connection. However, in this process of discovering his origin and who he is,
2 days amid all that blood until they found us.
Dexter discovers that Harry lied about many things and did a lot of things wrong, and he understands that his father programmed him to be who he is. Yes, with good intentions, but in the end, it's still manipulation. This plunges Dexter into a deep existential and identity crisis. His father, his rules, his law, his code, everything he believes is right has fallen apart, and all that code and those rules he was told have also collapsed. Who is he? And how is he supposed to act? Right now, he's facing a huge emptiness. This is something many people can experience in small doses during adolescence. When you grow up idealizing your parents, believing they're always right, do everything well, and are your heroes. And little by little, you start realizing that they have flaws, that they make mistakes, that they do things wrong. And you might start to feel a kind of disappointment, a sense of being cheated, and even want to rebel. And well, that's kind of where Dexter is right now. If my whole sense of self was tied to him, built on a lie, who am I? How should I behave? At this point, Dexter is no longer a robot. He's no longer a cold, emotionless being.
And my sister?
Now he has people he cares about. He empathizes with how they feel. He wants a life with them. But reconciling that with an addiction to killing and a current total lack of direction or guidance about how to act morally. Well, all of this is the perfect recipe for disaster. And when someone has grown up with a completely imposed moral code, it doesn't allow them to develop their own. If you've spent your whole life being told, this is right, this is who you are, and this is how you should act, and you don't consider any other alternative, then you don't go through that process of uncertainty, self-discovery, and trial and error that allows you to build your own compass, your own value system, and your ability to guide yourself. Dexter has realized he isn't a monster, despite being taught his whole life that he is and must act like one. Now he doesn't know how to live without being that monster. Even though he wants to get rid of it, he doesn't know how to live without what he calls his dark passenger. And well, within this crisis, this confusion, and this incompatibility of life goals, a lot of things happen in the series. He has a baby with Rita, and because of doing things wrong, one of the main serial killers, Trinity, kills Rita, and paradoxically, Dexter's baby is left. Harrison, who witnesses this scene and is left there covered in his mother's blood. I have to tell you that for me, this moment in the series was very shocking. Oh, I think I'm even getting emotional about it. Seeing how, in just a moment, they end Rita's life, after how good she was to Dexter, how she took care of him, and how she helped him heal. I don't know, this scene, this ending, honestly, it really unsettled me. I don't know about you, but it was pretty hard for me to process. As a result of this, Dexter has different problems. He loses contact with Rita's children, who by this point were already like his own kids. And well, he puts the lives of many people he cares about in danger, as well as his own. It's like Dexter is kind of out of control now. At a certain point, his sister Deborah discovers his secret. She finds out who he really is, and Deborah, whose identity has always been that of an ethical, upright police officer who does everything by the book, faces a huge dilemma. Turn in her brother and have him probably sentenced to the death penalty, or betray all her values, her identity, and everything she believes in. In the end, she decides to protect him, cover for him, and even takes the life of a police officer who was suspicious of Dexter. And well, as a consequence of this, she falls into a deep depression, substance abuse, and self-destructive behaviors. For me, it wasn't just Rita's death that affected me, but also seeing how all of this impacts Deborah, a character that, by the way, I really love. I love her authenticity, her empathy, how she never stops believing in her brother Dexter, even when she knows who he is and what he does, and she tries to help him overcome this addiction. Dexter can't manage to quit his addiction, and there even comes a point when he decides that he doesn't have to give it up. But nevertheless, he keeps accumulating more and more guilt throughout the whole series. Until finally, because of his actions, Deborah dies, the very person who had always believed in him, protected him, and helped him. Here, the guilt becomes unbearable, and Dexter decides to sail into the heart of a storm with the body of his late sister while he cries and asks for forgiveness. His decision is to disappear completely so he won't keep hurting those he loves and to protect his son Harrison and his new girlfriend Hannah. I don't think it's necessary at this point to explain why Dexter isn't a psychopath, but rather a traumatized person who has been made into one and trained to become one. A core of trauma with some obsessive, schizoid, and antisocial traits developed as a defense. But, fortunately or unfortunately, what is learned, even if it is deeply ingrained in us, can be unlearned, and that is precisely what therapy is about. To understand the why and the purpose behind our actions, to comprehend what our discomfort needs. To let go of what no longer helps us, but instead harms us and limits us. And to find much healthier and more functional ways to relate to others or to ourselves and to manage our discomfort. You already know that at Estar Contigo Therapy, we offer therapy that is affordable for everyone. Deep and scientific quality therapy so you can heal, understand yourself, and grow without money being an issue. I'll leave a link in the description and in the comments so you can book your first session for free. And tell me what you thought of this analysis and if you want me to make a video analyzing these serial killers who are featured in each season of the Dexter series. For example, Trinity or the Ice Truck Killer. Let me know in the comments. Bye.